You know, I'm expecting that there'll be more people that will come, but what's happening now that we're finding, because we check our live stream, is now when we live stream things, people just watch from their home, from their TV, so it's way too convenient. But, you know, it's still that piece of, it's like, when do we... Yeah, exactly. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, everybody, we're gonna begin. There still may be other people coming in, and we know that there's lots of folks that are watching on. This is being live streamed, but because it's live streamed, we want to start on time, and it's really good to see everybody. My name's Kavod Weider. I'm the rabbi here at Temple Bethel of South Orange County, and really want to give great thanks to not only the Shalom Hartman Institute for having this amazing program that we're going to hear about and explore around today, but also the Jewish Federation of Orange County. Lisa Armoni has been instrumental in being able to not only help support a weekend for the Muslim Leadership Initiative that's happening here in Orange County, but also being able to make this evening possible and helping make this shidduch, or this match between with Temple Bethel. So I'm going to introduce our two guests here, and then this will be a bit of a dialogue and a panel as a way of learning. And I really appreciate everybody who is either online or here in person to come and be that's with us today. So Imam Abdullah Antepli is a fellow on Jewish-Muslim relations at the Shalom Hartman Institute and co-director of the Muslim Leadership Initiative. He's on the faculty at both Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy and Duke Divinity School, where from 2008 to 2014 he served as the university's first Muslim chaplain, one of only a handful of full-time Muslim chaplains at U.S. colleges and universities. He's recently recognized as one of the most influential Muslims in U.S. higher education by the nonprofit Times. In his That deserved an applause. In his multiple roles at Duke, Imam Abdullah engages students, faculty, and staff across and beyond campus through seminars, panels, and other avenues to provide a Muslim voice and perspective to the discussions of faith, spirituality, social justice, and more. Imam Abdullah also serves as a faculty member in the Duke Divinity School, teaching courses on Islam and Muslim cultures. From 1996 to 2003, Imam Abdullah worked on a variety of faith-based humanitarian and relief projects in Myanmar, in Burma, and in Malaysia with the Association of Social and Economic Solidarity with Pacific countries. He then served as the first Muslim chaplain at Wesleyan University and subsequently as the associate director of the Islamic Chaplaincy Program and Interfaith Relations and an adjunct faculty member at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut. He's also the founder and executive board member of the Association of College Muslim Chaplains and a board member of the Association for College and University Religious Affairs. So quite a resume. Maytal Friedman is the director of intergroup initiatives at Shalom Hartman Institute of North America, where she previously served as Muslim Leadership Initiative co-director along with Yossi Klein Halevi and Imam Abdullah. She has served as Senior Program Director at Repair the World, where she led the organization's signature multi-site volunteering initiative. Prior to joining Repair the World, Maytal was selected as a Dorot Fellow to volunteer and study in Israel, where she directed and produced a film on women's religious identity. Maytal also worked at CASES, an alternative to incarceration in New York City, and founded a community library with a local nonprofit in Mbale, Uganda. As a Wexner Graduate Fellow, Davidson Scholar, Maytal earned a Master in Public Administration and Nonprofit Management with a specialization in International Development from New York University. She also holds a Bachelor of Arts from Princeton University in Religion and African Studies and lives in Westchester, New York with her family. Okay, so let's launch right in. So together you launched the Muslim Leadership Initiative, MLI. Can you tell us about the vision for the program and what you hope to accomplish? What brought you to this? Yeah, just you'll turn it on, sorry.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. Shalom. It is a distinct pleasure and honor. Thank you for that warm and gracious welcome. It's wonderful to be in Orange County. MLI, Muslim Leadership Initiative, which is housed at Shalom Hartman Institute, initially it went through my own partnership with Shalom Hartman Institute. It is a very genuine and sincere desire to see American Jews and American Muslims, how can we do better in America as two distinct minority faith communities which has remarkable similarities between Judaism and Islam, and which has remarkable social, ethical, moral challenges, very similar and unique to us as well. I told a group of friends this morning here in the other part of the Orange County, as a college Muslim chaplain, every August I welcome a new freshman, Muslim freshman coming to my university. It's one of the happiest time of my life. And these Muslim parents, they drop their daughters and sons to Duke University dorms. They turn the corner, cry about an hour and a half. And with the swollen eyes, they come and find me. And they ask three things, all the time three things. Imam Saab, make sure my daughter and son shows up at Jummah. Make sure you take attendance. At least once a week, they appear in your horizon, in your radar screen. Okay, that's pretty much within my job description. Second, make sure before they graduate from Duke University, they will date, ideally engage with a fellow Muslim with the opposite gender. Make sure. So my job, my expectation is make sure I will find another fellow Muslim boy and girl and they will be happily married after. The third one is the most profound and theologically grounded. And then the third thing they ask, Imam, make sure they go to medical school. Make sure they go. Is there anything more Jewish than this? Typical Jewish stereotype. So this encounter every year is almost no exception, is another indication and somewhat painful reminder for Muslims and Muslim parents and Jewish parents, we have similar concerns. Will our children, grandchildren hold on to this tradition? Will they have loyalty to this tradition? Is the cost of being an American and making in America means we have to lose everything? We have to lose everything that makes us who we are. Another example is when the Pew result came in 2013 about Jewish Americans, when Pew had this decade-long research about the Jewish American identities and the levels of integration into American society, the next day, I had like almost a dozen phone calls from all over the United States, Muslim communities calling my office, leaving a message and saying, you seem to know something about Jews and Muslims. We read the report, we are horrified. The levels of assimilation, the levels of interfaith marriage, the level of disconnection and checking out of the tradition. So look at these two communities, how similar they are in their deep core challenges and opportunities in American society. Despite similarities in our theological and religious and social concerns, American Jews and American Muslims, we are not doing well, mainly because of the way in which we experience and understand Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The way we observe and experience, the way we consume information about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that toxicity of that political conflict in the Middle East, I'm not trivializing it. I am not trivializing or dismissing neither my own communities and myself, my loyalty and attachment to Palestinian suffering and Palestinian solidarity, and neither I'm trivializing the Jewish community's solidarity with the Zionism and Israel either. But the way in which that conflict, that division and polarization happening in the Middle East, it is spilling over to the United States and it's polarizing us. It is dividing us in increasing fashion. And in 2010, 10 years after 9/11, when we were watching to see if America and fellow Americans are really responding to post-9/11 crises. Are we recovering from that insanity of constant repetition of Islam is evil, Muslims are terrorists after 9/11, over and over again? When we were looking how the American community is doing in terms of understanding Islam as a religion and American Muslims as fellow American citizens, it was very clear around 2010 over a Park 51 controversy. Do you remember? When a group of Muslims in New York City was trying to build a mosque. Every poll was showing that our interfaith efforts, our outreach, our engagement with the Jewish community and the Christian communities, it was making marginal impact at its best. And the larger number of American citizens, fellow Americans, they were somehow internalizing that Islam is evil and Muslims are terrorist stuff. And within the two community was the most vulnerable. It was very clear the rising Islamophobia, rising Muslim hatred was the intentional, deliberate campaign against scaring Americans with Islam and Muslims was coming from two distinct communities. One, far-right evangelical Christian communities, and another sources of this misunderstanding and this bias against Islam and Muslims was coming from a non-representative, marginal quantitatively, but qualitatively very impactful far-right Jewish organizations and the Jewish communities. And when we find out who are these people who are behind Sharia ban, behind 2012 campaigns against Islam and Muslims, some, again, marginal, they don't represent the American Jewish community, but because of their qualitative impact, they were holding large segments of the American Jewish communities hostage by tapping into their resources in promoting hate and bigotry against Islam and Muslims. So in reaction to this, a group of very close friends of mine who are in this business of fighting against Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, we took this as a self-critical, if these American Jews are not able to understand us, if these bad faith actors so easily manipulate us, scare them about Islam and Muslims, it's part of our fault that we weren't able to explain ourselves. We weren't able to engage with them. So if we find a credible, respected Jewish organization, and through our partnership with that organization, can we reach out to American Jewish communities by showing goodwill and understanding to them? And Shalom Hartman Institute, as you know, as you are affiliated with, is that organization came in response to my prayers. That we were able to not only take 8 cohorts now of these group of North American Muslims, Canadian. We have several members of that group here with us today. We were able, this is not a dialogue, this is not an engagement. And after we hear from Maytal, maybe I can say a little bit more of the program, about the program, has been nothing but a profoundly successful in its impact in terms of understanding and making sense of American Jewish communities' connection, loyalty, affinity, love, and appreciation to Judaism, Zionism, and Israel. We were able to make sense of their psychological makeup. We were able to make sense of the world through their own eyes. We were able to see it, and we were able to meet the American Jewish communities where they are. Educational, it's been a successful program, but in terms of communal politics, we are going to talk. It's a lot more complicated.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for welcoming us here tonight. I'll start with a personal story from the year that I lived in Jerusalem working on that film. I also studied Arabic, and every week I would walk from West Jerusalem, where I lived, through an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood, Mea Shearim, across what was the Green Line into East Jerusalem to Arabic class. And inevitably, no matter what I was wearing, no matter how I was dressed, jeans, a t-shirt, a backpack, somebody would say to me, the Kotel, the Western Wall, is that way. It was clear that I didn't belong, and it was clear that people who looked like me, other Jews, other American Jews, and other Israeli Jews, did not go into those neighborhoods. And similarly, when I spoke to Jewish family and friends, and I said to them, every week I'm studying Arabic. Oh, where are you studying Arabic? At Al-Quds University. They would say, well, isn't that in East Jerusalem? You can't go there. It's not safe, because they didn't go there. And it was very clear to me the way that dividing line, that road between Mea Shearim and East Jerusalem, was not just a road, but a real barrier between people. And as you heard from Abdullah, that barrier that exists in Israel-Palestine, that barrier that exists 3 miles away, was being translated back here in terms of relations between Muslim and Jewish communities. So I actually joined MLI after Trump's election. The program was already in existence. And shortly after he was elected, as you remember, he initiated the Muslim ban, and Jewish groups and other groups were pouring out at airports and into the street in sincere solidarity with Muslim friends and neighbors and fellow Americans to oppose the kind of hateful rhetoric and hateful policy that Trump was putting into place. And yet, despite that, there was clear division and clear suspicion between our communities. And it became increasingly clear to me that we were talking past each other, that the very divisions that we had spoken about were making it impossible for us to be in relationship with each other. The term Zionism is just one example. What I understand as Zionism, what I have grown up with and is close to my heart around what Israel can be, maybe it isn't yet, but what Israel could be for the Jewish people is not what many of my Muslim friends and colleagues understand when they first hear the word Zionism, which for them is sometimes equated with racism or colonial settler policies. And so the idea of this program, where Muslim leaders were actually coming and trying to understand Jews for who they are, was incredibly intriguing to me. And the more that I got into the program, the more that I met the participants who were stepping into significant controversy, risking their own personal and professional reputations to build bridges and to understand who we are, was just such a profound experience. And watching over the last 5 years the ways in which that deep education has allowed them to then go into Jewish communities very much like this one and speak about who they are, and the Jewish community's openness and willingness to hear that from people who first listened has been quite a profound experience.
So give us a little example of what's some of the learning that takes place at MLI? At the how do Muslims and Jews learn together?
So the program is an intensely academic one. There is a lot of study in the traditional Jewish way of taking texts, grappling with them, and what the Hartman Institute does is bring out the themes and ideas and apply them to modern day questions, modern day challenges that the Jewish community is facing. And one of the promises that we made when Imam Abdullah approached us about developing this program with him is that we're not creating a new curriculum. We are going to teach and invite Muslim leaders into the internal conversation that Jews have. We're not going to craft a narrative that they would like, that presents a particular story about who we are, but we're actually going to share with them the good, bad, and the ugly, both about our tradition, our conflicts, our life in America, and about our relationship to and understanding of Israel and Zionism. And so I would say maybe even to the chagrin of the participants, there is never one narrative presented, but really they enter into the argumentation and the debate from our tradition, going back to Talmudic sources. And many of them joke that when they come back and they, say to their Jewish friends, "Oh, you know that Talmudic passage, Tanur Shalachnai?" And their Jewish friends were like, "What? How do you know so much Talmud?" Rabbi Akiva, Hillel, Shammai, and so it's highly text-based, and it goes all the way from biblical texts and questions of God. How do Jews understand God? How do they understand God in the Bible? How do rabbis understand God? To questions of rabbinic authority, all the way through questions and of power and justice as they relate to Israel and the Palestinian conflict. And more, we've also been exploring American-Jewish relationship to America and questions of power and vulnerability, anti-Semitism, and Jewish responsibility here in North America.
Beautiful. Maybe a few examples instead of going to detail, but it's incredibly important what Maytal shared. The curriculum of MLI to these North American Muslim leaders is not Judaism, Zionism 101 to Muslims. Mm-hmm. It is not a dialogue or engagement program. It's the same exact curriculum that Hartman has been teaching for the last 50 years to thousands of rabbis, thousands of community leaders. The same exact. The invitation is to be, again, witnessing the internal Jewish dilemma. And it's incredibly honest. The good, the bad, and ugly, no topic is off the table, which is incredibly profound. I remember like one of those really home run moments of learning. One participant, 6 months into the program, she said, "Abdullah, I hate you. I really hate you." I said, "What happened?" Before this program, I was telling to myself, I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm an anti-Zionist. I'm an anti-Israeli. I am not an anti-Semite. But now that I see what Zionism is and isn't, and how differently understood and experienced by a broad spectrum of North American and Israeli Jews, they don't make that distinction. So now that comfortable space I was sitting for years, feeling good about myself, is not comfortable anymore. Similarly, as an American Muslim, when people tell me what Islam and Islam isn't, who Muslims are and what they are and what they are not about, I say, you can't do that. You cannot define who I am. You have to allow me to define and self-express myself. But I've been doing this to the Jewish community for years on my own. And it's not right. I don't have to agree any political implications of that form of nationalism or ideology. But I can't impose identities on people who themselves are not defining themselves in those terms. This is a dayenu moment, as we say in Islam. It's an incredible dayenu moment because this could happen more. Another example on the Jewish side, even though we are students in that program, even we are receiving this curriculum, educational curriculum, I think we made an incredible impact to Shalom Hartman faculty, staff, and people. I will never forget, after maybe a year into the program, some of the staff are Israelis. They grew up in Jerusalem. They can see Aqsa from their windows, from their home windows and from their office windows. I remember like one of those moments, I've been living in this city for 45 years. I neither noticed Aqsa nor ever wondered why is this important to the Muslim community. I had no idea why there was such a big deal about this. She said, I now cannot unsee it. I cannot unsee it anymore. It's right there. Your presence, this relationship is impacting in such a way that there's an open space in my heart to your narrative, to your story, to your understanding, which is impossible to undo again.
Beautiful. So just to go on with that a little bit more, one of the common critiques of the program is that it's one-sided, right? That you're exposing Muslims to the Jewish narrative, and yet what you were just saying right there was the sense of, well, now there's, as a result of the program, there are Jews that are now also open to what the reality might be for Muslims, but that's not the bulk of the program. That's not so. How can you justify just bringing Muslim leaders to only understand Jewish narratives about Israel if this is a Muslim leadership initiative?
This question is an accurate one, but it's a reflection of this deficit of trust between our communities. This deficit of ill will or abundance of ill will. Like if there is a one-sided education, there must be something bad behind this. The program, as definition, as we have been explaining, yes, it is one-sided. That is accurate. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. When thousands of Americans go to China, learn Chinese and Chinese culture, nobody asks them, oh, because I'm understanding your culture, you have to learn mine. Or while you're presenting Chinese, I don't understand the logic behind this. Most form of education is in this way. And if you ask these critics of the program, oh, this is one-sided, you are neglecting the other side, or there should be a balanced representation, as if they are from those communities when there is a presentation of the Palestinian narrative, side by side, always the Israeli or the Zionist narrative has been presented. Like when you are making a moral critique and attack, are you standing in any moral ground that you actually practice what you are preaching? That's absolutely not the case. And educationally, it is one-sided, and that's what, by design and by intention, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. The third thing, the problem, logical problem, again, people can't see how this is morally inconsistent. The third thing is, if I want to learn Palestinian narrative, why would I go to Israeli Zionist organization? That expectation is even understandably so, and I will tell you, there's a component about the Palestinian narrative, but it's independent from the Hartman. Hartman so admirably gives the participants a time and opportunity and even resources to supplementally learn more about the Palestinian narratives. And almost every single participant, at least in sufficient levels, understand and has been exposed to Palestinian narratives. That's the whole idea, to learn the Jewish and Israeli narratives on this issue. But Hartman gives independence to me and the other Muslim faculty to develop that Palestinian component independently, where we can go and understand and deepen our understanding of the Palestinian narratives from Palestinians, through Palestinian organizations. So this is a logical fallacy. I'm trying to control my anger and frustration so that I can say something reasonably. Because this is an easy mudslinging of a it is not coming from a good place. That's what I'm trying. If most rational people will understand, if you go and apply to a master's program, people deliver a set curriculum, and of course that's the curriculum you are signing up to understand and make sense. You don't demand that, not that I'm learning your program, you have to do X, Y, and Z. It doesn't work that way.
I want to add two pieces to this. One is a little bit on the pedagogy, which is that oftentimes when we're in interfaith spaces, we feel the need to give comparisons. You do this, and you believe in God this way, so then we're understanding each other's traditions actually through our own lenses. And one of the things that MLI aspires to do is to try to understand Jews and Judaism, Israel and Zionism on its own terms. In one of the opening sessions, Danielle Hartman often often shares with the groups, like at the beginning, you're gonna try to understand what we're teaching you within your own categories. But your own categories are categories from the Muslim tradition. And you can't understand Judaism through the categories of Islam. You actually need to understand Judaism as Judaism, and that's a really, really, really hard thing to do. And sometimes when we're so concerned about the back and forth, we miss out on the opportunity to understand something for what it is and not just within our own lenses. It's a very difficult challenge. And I would say that actually I had this experience on the flip side on a program called Encounter, on a program that brings Jewish leaders to hear Palestinian voices within the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And we spend 5 days, and the program spends 5 days only listening to Palestinian voices. And you know what? They get the same critique. Oh, you're there listening to Palestinian voices? Well, why aren't you telling the Jewish narrative? Why aren't you talking about Zionism from the Jewish perspective? And they have quite a similar response, which is Jews have all sorts of other places to learn about Israel and Zionism from the Jewish perspective. They have day schools, they have camps, they have supplementary schools. There are plenty of places for them to go. Where is the space where they get to hear Palestinian voices telling their stories? And that is the construct. And I think in many ways, all of our work operates within an ecosystem, and each of our organizations needs to find the way in which we're contributing to building bridges. And our organization, the Shalom Hartman Institute, and the partnership with Imam Abdullah on MLI is really about education. And there are other organizations that do work in advocacy, and there are other organizations that do work in diplomacy and relationship building. And our particular focus is around the education.
And the bad blood that we try to explain, it is not a Muslim paranoia. There are those Hasbara trips. There are those propaganda outreaches where people are taking trips and seeing only one side and sugar-coated version. And I think that bad blood, that precedence for that kind of bad stuff, is people assume this is one of them. This is another Hasbara trip. It's absolutely not the case. But to supplement the education, because initial first couple of cohorts, people who went there they have decades of pro-Palestinian activism. They already know pro-Palestinian Palestinian reality, the depth of Palestinian suffering. They all have decades of involvement and engagement. But as we recruited more people, most American Muslims are at least nominally would be pro-Palestinian, but we realized their knowledge base is not strong enough, so we increasingly added 2 additional days independently. Its curriculum, its education is independently built by myself and Palestinian faculty that I have developed a relationship with, where we spend 1 day in West Bank and another 1 full day within Israel in Arab cities. 20% of the Israeli society is Palestinian, Arab, majority Muslim, and that 20% of Palestinians, their voice, even within the Palestinian communities, are not heard of. When people think of Palestinian activism, they think Gaza, they think of West Bank, they think of refugees all around the world. But those who are Israeli citizen Palestinians, their voices, their dilemmas, their challenges and opportunities are often not even mentioned. So we spend 1 full day with that community as well. But again, this is not at the expense of our curriculum on the Jewish version or Jewish narratives. This is an additional supplement that we are providing.
Beautiful. You know, you spoke about learning about each other, trying to step outside of your own lenses to learn about each other. And I'm wondering, either for you personally, Abdullah, or from participants that you see in MLI, what would you say is either the most common kind of aha moment about the Jewish experience and the Israeli experience? Like, what do you see as being, wow, that's what it's about for them? Like, so I'd love to hear about that. And in your experience, Maytal, also just through the work that you do, what's been kind of the aha moment for you about the Muslim experience?
I'll say two, I think, 2 very different things. One is the the prayer experience. I have to start with the prayer experience, from being able to participate and join in Muslim prayer. And it is really such a transformative experience that feels quite different than being in a Jewish prayer setting. People get, first of all, if you haven't experienced it, I highly recommend you find a Muslim friend, a colleague, a local mosque. People get shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot, very close together. There are no prayer books. It is being led in the front, and people are going down to their knees, getting all the way down to the ground, and it is such a physical experience of submission that really that is embodied in a way that sitting in the pews with a prayer book feels very, very different. And so it's truly a gift to be able to experience and see how other people supplicate and offer prayer. That one really always leaves me inspired. And I think what Abdullah said earlier about noticing Aqsa is a really significant one, and not just the physical space, but the deep and multifaceted connections that the Muslim community has to Jerusalem and to the Palestinian people. I have heard and experienced, it's our holiest city, and we have only one. And for Muslims, it's their third holiest city. And so, why do they really care so much about it? And then to be in Jerusalem with people who are having intensely spiritual connections to Al-Aqsa, to this holy site, and understanding the deep spiritual, historic connection of the story of Muhammad on that site, and then also, for us, the notion of peoplehood is really significant, and standing by your people and seeing that reflected in another community that also cares deeply about their fellow believers is quite powerful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I will mention two incredibly consistent and very common aha moments. One very positive, one difficult one, and which explains the heart of the program as well. Like, I have seen this over and over again. When Muslims and Jews in the same room spend enough time, and there's a little bit of flourishing of trust, where they can suspend those political jargon and mistrust, once they connect to the Jewish community in their religiosity, in religion, when the Jewish religious language is spoken, I remember one of the participants said, like, every once in a while I have to pinch myself. I shouldn't like these people. Like, what's going on? It is so similar. The language is so similar. One participant, we went to the Western Wall, and she looked at the English translation of the prayers that these people are saying in the Western Wall, and she started crying. I used to see these people and hate them. Look at the language they are using, the way they pray to God. In the same way, in such a beautiful way, they are glorifying God's names. This is over and over again, understanding the Jewish legal, normative, but also deeply devotional, spiritual language is so similar to Muslim experience. That similarity always mesmerizes and enthralls the Muslim in every level. Like, it's almost inevitable. They have to sort of come back to their senses. Like, what's going on here? Am I in a mosque or a synagogue? Am I in a madrasa or a yeshiva? Am I in a religious Muslim space or a Jewish space? It's always that similarity, that language, the good, bad, and ugly. You talk about gender issues in Judaism, and every Muslim say, yep, that's my uncle. You talk about LGBTQ issue, yep, that's my cousin. And like, you see themselves, that empathy, that similarity is incredibly profound. The biggest learning stretch for many Muslims, I don't want to generalize, but it's very common, they have a much easier time understanding Judaism as a religion. If Judaism is a religion like Islam, like Christianity, it's a text, law, God, scripture, synagogue, worship, no problem. And given the Jewish experience in the Muslim majority world, where they had a religious autonomy, where they were able to practice their religion much easily and much more harmoniously with the Muslim majority compared to Christian Europe. So there is not much challenge there. But to understand Jews and Judaism as people, as a nation, as an ethnicity, as a tribe, with a desire to self-determination, that sovereignty, it's a very difficult thing to understand, how a religious identity can also be your ethnic identity. Like, I am a Turkish Muslim. My national and ethnic aspirations are Turkish, but my religion is Islam. This could become all one in the Jewish community is an incredible big challenge. Mm-hmm. And that's why I highly encourage our co-conspirator, Yossi Klein Halevi, his latest book, my Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, is an incredibly profound way of explaining. As a result of MLI, he understood this is a much difficult issue for many Muslims to understand. He wrote this incredible, beautiful book. In a way, you don't have to agree, again, any of the policies of the state, but here's an explanation how you can be both a religion and a people, how you can both be a faith community, at the same time, a nation that aspires to have a majority and sovereignty.
Yeah.
Just to give one example of how this manifests for Islam, which is a religion based on faith in God, the idea that you can be connected to a people without that faith in God, as Yehuda quotes someone saying, the Jewish people believe in one or fewer gods. And then one of the biggest questions that we get from secular Zionists to secular Zionists is, wait, you're telling me that you have claims to this land based on a Bible that you don't believe God gave you? Like, how does that make any sense? And that's a manifestation of this very struggle.
Again, in the Pew result, there are more Jews believe that this land is promised to the Jewish people than the number of Jews who believe in God. So there are more Jews who don't believe in God. And so go figure that secular Judaism is a very difficult thing to, secular Zionism, I apologize. Secular Zionism is a very difficult thing to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that MLI is about, it's learning about the values and visions and struggle of the Jewish community. What are some of the deepest concerns for the Muslim community today in North America?
One of the most important concerns, which I alluded at the beginning of my talk, is Muslim continuity. Islam doesn't have the resilience and the survival gene that Judaism has. And Judaism developed the survival gene in the face of hostility. It is one thing to preserve your continuity, your tradition, once you are subject to ghettoization, living in the same zip code with your own people, you are not wanted and accepted. So Judaism was also experiencing what happens when there's not enough hate around you, when there's comfort, when there's acceptance, how Jewish continuity will go. Similar to American experience, there were close to 1 million Muslims came to this country between 1870s to 1924, when we closed the borders. Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Every study says maybe 10% remain Muslim. By the second and the third generation, that initial immigration wave, they just disappeared, they just assimilated. It's a difficult thing. Language and tradition is not genetic. If you don't teach and if you don't pass on to one generation, and it deteriorates very quickly. It's like a language. It is not spoken, it is spoken less in the second generation, it is not spoken in the third generation, it just disappears. I think the biggest concern is we want whatever this melting pot of America promises us, the civil liberties, the economic prosperity, comfort, safety, security. But we want minimal cost to our tradition. Is there a way in which we can negotiate this melting pot in a way that my grandchildren will know who Muhammad is, that their kitchen will reflect my ethics and values, that they will have a love of Allah in their heart, This is a very real, genuine concern to many, many Muslims. The second concern is Islamophobia. In this country, after 9/11, if you look at the polls, early 2002, if you look at Gallup, Pew, PRI, and the other polling agencies, 4 or 5 months after 9/11, when Americans were asked, basically, is Islam a kosher religion? Is Islam an acceptable religion? Is Islam an American religion? Are American Muslims equal American citizens? Number of people who said no to that question was about 20%, early 2002. Now, the recent poll, 2019 or 2020 numbers say 57% of Americans says no to that question. 57% of Americans, more than 1 in 2 Americans. And it is geographically significant. In blue states, that goes down to 30%. In red states, it goes to 80, 90%. So large segments of Americans, majority of whom belong to a particular red states, particular faith communities, particular political party, moved from, I don't know, I'm frustrated, I have no idea who these people are, what Islam is, what American Muslims are, to something is wrong with these people. Our reputation, our image, more than half of fellow Americans, they feel uncomfortable with the whole concept. And American Jews know all that well, how that large-scale dehumanization, hatred, what will that mean? How will it translate when something goes really wrong or out of control? The second question is incredibly the Islamophobia. The third question is related to the both. In this hostile environment, where even if there is no hostility, keeping the tradition is in itself a very difficult job. How are we going to keep what needs to be kept, and how are we going to change what needs to be changed in Islam? How are we going to engage with real American conversations? I'm a college chaplain for the last 20 years. The younger generations are asking, independently from any faith tradition, asking 3 or 4 questions, litmus test about their faith tradition. They are asking 3, 4 central questions whether or not I am going to continue to believe in this tradition. One, what does this religion say about women? And how do they value the role of women in this tradition? Is there any way? And if we are going to keep those practices and the things that we've been saying about gender dynamics in our tradition, we are going to lose a very significant number of future generations. They are not going to sign up to this. Second, what does this religion say about the members of the other faith traditions? What are they saying about the members of people who are following other faith traditions? What is their role? Are they ethical, moral people? Will God's light ever shine upon them? Again, if you don't have a new and more compelling and engaging answer to these questions, many of them will sign off. LGBTQ, another very real American conversation that people are asking themselves. This has nothing to do with Islamophobia, etc. It has something to do. But is the young generation can relate and connect to Islam that is deeply rooted in Islamic tradition, but answering these modern questions, these compelling questions, in any meaningful and constructive and loving and caring way. Yeah. This is the third category of things which we are struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear a lot of similarities. There's a few different themes that you've both touched on that I want to bring out, and this is a little bit of a different question from that aha moment question, but it does have to do with what we can learn from each other. There was a pilgrimage of a group of rabbis to Dharamsala, India, in the 90s. It was captured, the story was captured in the book The Jew in the Lotus. And they came to meet with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama had asked, because the Dalai Lama was interested in learning from Jews, we as the Tibetan people are exiled from our land. How do we keep our tradition going when there's, and they looked at, at Jews, you've been doing this for years and years and years. Interesting enough, one of the main answers was summer camps. And as a result, the Dalai Lama sent Tibetan emissaries to Jewish summer camps all over all over the country, and I was at one of them when they came, and at the same time there was this, as not only that learning, but those rabbis who also experienced, were able to have reflected back to the Dalai Lama some of the incredible depths of their own tradition. That's on one hand. That's one hand of how another people was learning from Jews. On the other hand, I also, in my rabbinic thesis and interest, have learned a lot about and explored how much Judaism, especially our mystical tradition, has been influenced by Sufi teachings, especially in the 9th, 10th, 11th century. Even the Rambam Maimonides and his son, Abraham Maimonides, even went ahead and said that the prophetic tradition in Judaism had been lost for many, many years. But the Sufis have kept it alive. And you were speaking about the beauty of prayer and prostration, and we know that we used to have that kind of prostration and that kind of style prayer, and for different reasons it went away. But he was basically saying, if we want to learn about our own prophetic tradition, we need to learn from the Sufis, from those who are practicing Islam, from this more mystical experience. And so for me, I look and I see the way that Islam has played a huge effect on our own tradition, and especially on those pieces. So my question for both of you, is one for Abdullah, is what do you feel like is some of the most important things that Muslims can learn from the Jewish people? And I'm thinking about that, as you said, how do we keep our tradition alive in this country? And Maytal, what do you feel like are some of the most important things that Jews can learn from Muslims?
So I think I'd go back to prayer, but I'm not going to do the prayer one again. I think that there is a diversity among the Muslim community. I mean, there are many, many more Muslims, obviously, than Jews. But in North America, the communities from all over the world who are Muslim are coming together, learning to live together. You have, and with African American Muslims, and there is such rich culture and tradition and an exchange of that those ethnic backgrounds. And I think our community, look, I think in honest conversations, we all struggle with what it looks like to build more diverse communities, and how we integrate, especially in America. I won't speak to Canada, but especially in an America that we swim in waters of deep racism. But as our community tries to figure that out, like what does it look like for our community to be more ethnically and racially diverse? I think we have partners, strong partners in that work, and there's a lot to learn from a community that is far more diverse than we are.
Beautiful. Thank you. Your question is profound, and because of that question, I initially started MLI. It was a self-defense tactique. How can we defeat Islamophobia in the Jewish community? How can we undermine the Muslim-hating Jews and Jewish organizations? But why I am in it day and night, working really hard, is that self-defense became a secondary motive for me now. The incredible amount of wisdom, accumulated wisdom, learned through successes and the failures of the Jewish community. How did Jews in America evolve from a hated, despised minority of 1920s into a beloved community, minority of 2022? And what kind of successes and failures, what mistakes, what successes they have gone through. There's so much untapped wisdom there that we can learn communally and socially. Therefore, one of the funniest and dirtiest and misleading, horrible word, hyphenated word in our culture today is Judeo-Christian civilization. Like, it's funny. When I first heard, I thought somebody was mocking. What Judeo-Christian civilization? If you studied Jewish-Christian relations for the last 2,000 years, you would be ashamed to call it Jewish. It was a relationship. It wasn't a relationship. It was something completely hostile, where Jewish communities are saved in Europe because of a very particular theology. Otherwise, they were all seen as Christ killers and etc. So there was no joint civilization per se. But one can talk about Judeo-Islamic civilization, as you said. Not only Islam, Sufism influenced Judaism, but Judaism influenced Islam too. There was a joint civilization. If you look anywhere in Andalus, anywhere in North America, in North Africa, anywhere look in the Middle East, much of the art, music, architectural genius, it was a joint Islamo-Christian Jewish civilization. Every mosque you go to in any city, I am assuring if you go through this, there is a Jewish wisdom, Jewish understanding. Music, like I can give many different examples. There was a joint civilization. If we can resurrect that joint civilization that we have achieved, it wasn't rosy, it wasn't egalitarian, it wasn't equal 21st century democratic, progressive, but in its own time, it was a joint, commonly produced civilization that accumulated wisdom is there for us to explore together as American Jews and American Muslims, to see how that accumulated wisdom can inform our struggles of continuity in North America. There is so much to be learned. I can give many different examples, but it's endless. So why I'm doing MLI? Because MLI became to me and many of the participants a Muslim shopping cart in a Jewish supermarket. We are going through decades and decades of Jewish experience because cross-faith and cross-cultural engagement is best when it becomes a mirror to you. You are trying to understand and make sense of people who are different than you, but that experience holds a mirror to you. At some point, you learn more about yourself in the experience than the community that you are trying to understand and make sense. When it's done, and MLI is, I think, doing really one of the most promising jobs in that sense, as self-serving as that statement sounds, but it is giving more insights to its participants about American Muslim identity, how we are going to survive, how we are going to carve out a respectful space in American society for ourselves, how are we going to build complex institutions, complex sets, etc. One thing I will say, and that will surprise you, that will surprise the Jews at least. If I want one thing, if I can pick one thing we can learn from the Jewish community, culture of disagreement. I am just blown away, like every time I see. The Shalom Hartman is a pluralistic, incredibly inclusive organization. Under the same roof, you have far right, far left, anybody and everybody in between. Not too far right, too left, but majority of the. Hartman goes and teaches to J Street, Hartman goes to AJ Street. There are Hartman faculty who has no problem in calling occupation is a complete moral failure. There's a Hartman faculty, this is not an occupation. We have a right, biblical right to there. But they're under the same roof. The Muslim version of Shalom Hartman would look like, under the same madrasa, Sunnis and Shias, Ahmadis and Qadianis and Ismailis, pork-eating, sharab drinking, wine-drinking Muslims, and Pakka Muslim, very pious Muslims are, it's unthinkable. Like, it's really unthinkable, that level of intellectual diversity. Disagreements are real. These people are not agreeing with each other at all. In so many ways, they find engaging with Islam, it was very clear. Most of the Jews, they find dialoguing with Muslims a lot easier than dialoguing with fellow Jews. They have more problem with their fellow Jewish community, but somehow they find a way to work together. That culture of disagreement, that ability to find overarching loyalties and connection and sense of belonging and service to the community is a source of envy and admiration and jealousy, quite honestly, for me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. So I have one more question, and then I want to open it up to everyone to be able to ask and share some more. You know, we haven't spoken so much about the nature of the tensions between the two communities, and as we're, being able to, come together and have dialogue, the tensions and the pain that's around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very present. So you mentioned earlier, Abdullah, about building trust. That's really, it's really the key, like all the way through, to be able to talk about the things that are real. And I know that as I think about in our Orange County community here, we have a really wonderful relationship with the Orange County Islamic Foundation. We with them, and also the Shepherd of the Hills Church, every year we put together Thanksgiving baskets of food for families in need in Orange County, and we really rejoice in coming together and in being together. And yet I feel like with your coming here, and a lot of us too, we're starting to be ready to say, some of us, it's not enough. We need to be able to bring our full selves to these relationships. We need to not pretend that there's these issues happening. And so the key, what I'm hearing you say, is the key is trust, is being able to build trust to have those conversations. Tell us more about how your experience, about what's been successful in building trust. What are the things that you would say to Jews about how they can help build more trust with the Muslim community, and to Muslims about building trust with the Jewish community?
It's very interesting I think a key component of the trust that we have found is critical is actually the honesty and vulnerability. So I think part of where the mistrust comes in is when in the relationship everyone feels like they're tiptoeing around, or they can only present a certain part of who they are. But all of us individually are really complex with multiple identities, and our communities are any given synagogue, any given Hillel, any given mosque is actually made up of individuals with really, really different perspectives. So I'll give you an example. We had a convening of Muslim colleagues who were on campus and Jewish colleagues who were on campus, and we brought them together for a day to talk about what's unfolding between Muslim students and Jewish students on campus. And one of the Hillel directors at one point in the conference said, you know what, at the end of the day, what you're going to see is the statement that we put out. And so you're going to think that everyone is behind this statement. But what you won't see is the way that writing that statement and putting that statement out actually tore our community apart, and that there is incredibly diverse perspectives within our institution, even though we may have to publicly say something about what's unfolding. And I think that when we can peel that back, and when we can create the trust built on a level of vulnerability to say, we don't actually all agree, and when we can put down the talking points that either we think and rarely do convince one another, or they're to prove our loyalty, but when we can actually show that disagreement and actually show the ways in which we might not all have the same perspective, it opens up the space for someone else to say, yeah, you know what, in my community too we don't all agree, and we actually have multiple perspectives. That's one piece. The second piece that I think is really important is something that Yossi Klein Halevi, the colleague at the Hartman Institute that founded the Muslim Leadership Initiative and wrote with Imam Abdullah Antepli and wrote the book that Abdullah referred to. He says to our groups very often, you don't have to believe what I believe, but you have to believe that I believe it. And you have to believe in the sincerity of the other person and what they're telling you, that they actually do believe it, and that instead of asking them, what is your political position, asking them, why do you hold that political position? What are the values? The political position itself, I can think it's immoral. I can find it problematic. But can I understand what is the driving force? Is it justice? Is it continuation? Is it compromise? Is it a love of your people? What is it that's driving that political position? And what I often find in MLI and in other spaces where we're coming together across difference is that while our political positions might actually be quite different, And of course, they're probably different on only one set of issues. We probably have a lot in common. But is that actually our values and our commitments, whether it's a loyalty to our people, whether it's around continuity, whether it's around faith or justice or human rights, safety and security, that those are actually shared values, that how they manifest in political positions might look very, very different. And the third piece that I'll say, and I think we've hinted at this, is around language, that there are trigger words that we actually don't understand the way that they land for our communities. I gave Zionism as an example before. I think Abdullah mentioned Sharia, which is also another word that I think has lost its meaning, that we don't ask Muslim friends, what does Sharia mean to you? We make all sorts of assumptions about the kind of laws that maybe Muslims are trying to enact in this country. And so when we start to break those down and actually ask, what do you mean when you say Zionism? What do you mean when you say Sharia? And I'll go even further. What do you mean when you say pro-Palestinian, right? When sometimes when we hear pro-Palestinian, some Jews automatically think, oh, if you're pro-Palestinian, you must mean Jews have no right or ability to live in that land. But maybe actually what you mean is that Palestinians should have equal rights and an ability to vote for their own government. Maybe that's what you mean. And when we can step back and ask, what does pro-Israel mean? Does pro-Israel mean that there should be no Palestinians in the land? Or that we should continue an occupation indefinitely? For many people, that's not actually what pro-Palestinian means. But for some, that's what they think it means. So if we can peel back and try to understand what we're actually referring to and how each of us understands what the other is saying, it'll make a big difference.
Beautiful.
It's profound. You are absolutely right. Without tackling the trust deficit, there is no point really. And why there's trust deficit? Because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict within Jewish and Muslim communities. So I hope I'm not disrespecting to any attempts or any initiatives that you have mentioned and others. You may not start with Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but any Jewish-Muslim dialogue or initiative from the very beginning, if they are not aiming, intentionally and deliberately, hoping that their relationship will get into a level of sophistication and strength where they will talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think at its best, it's a waste of time. At its best, it's a waste of time. At its worst, it further deepens the problem in our communities. We have to be able to engage what is dividing us, what is polarizing us, what is giving rise to Muslim anti-Semitism, what is giving rise to Jewish Islamophobia. There is no point in keeping these elephants in the room and talking about hummus, chicken, kosher chicken, halal chicken. Like really, it's insane. Meital gave us a broad menu. I will just quickly summarize the two things. I think the work of trust building is always internal. It has to start internal. If you want to build trust between Jews and Muslims, a lot of work is initially internal. I love that Yom Kippur practice. And for those who are Muslim, if you haven't been to a Yom Kippur service, I really hope you will go. Like one of the climax of that service is everybody beats their chest about their sins, about their own guna, about their own sayyah. Nobody goes and beats the chest of this is what you have done, this is what you have done, etc. So the initial work of trust building between Jews and Muslims have to be internal. We have to look into our own problem. And if I can summarize, it requires a lot of unlearning of each other. We have to unlearn some of the things that we have learned about the other people. The stories, the terminology, and the definitions of the words that we have internalized for a very long time. I will give two to me main important one. The biggest moral homework for my community, for Muslim community, admirably and proudly pro-Palestinian, majority of them, their moral homework in trust building, if they are really serious about improving Jewish-Muslim relations, is they have to unlearn much of what they have learned about Zionism and what they have learned about Israel. They have to really revisit this issue because the way we have experienced the creation of the State of Israel and the stories that we have told so far is so complicated, so toxic, so inaccurate. It's leading to Muslim anti-Semitism in many parts of the world. we really have to, like we are doing to these terms what Islamophobes are doing to Islam. We are turning the entire complex identities around Zionism and Israel into one monolithic evil reality. So my community has to unlearn and relearn in its own accuracy and complexity what Zionism is and isn't, what Israel is and isn't, and what that Israel and secular nation states connection to Jews all around the world. We have some learning to do. And I think my Jewish brothers and sisters' main and most important and maybe most difficult moral homework is, I, as a Muslim, later on understood how this creation of the state of Israel meant. What did it mean? What is Jews going back to their ancestral homeland? And 2,000 years of religious fulfillment in so many ways, and safety and security I sort of understood that story. But without losing any of your pride to your Zionism, your love and loyalty and support to Israel, can you also open a space in your heart and mind that this creation of the state, this homecoming story, has shattered the entire people, has shattered the Palestinian community, that Palestinian suffering is not a fiction, it's not a lie. It is so real in its all, and it's getting worse in many parts of the world. Again, most people think it's not possible. Like there must be a way in which for ethical, moral Jews to internalize Palestinian suffering in much more serious way and putting their money where their mouth is. Again, you don't have to compromise on anything. There's a way in which, and I know majority of the American Jews, at least, they are two-state people. They really understand this. But there is a way in which I see that moral muscles are not there in terms of really internalizing this real human suffering that's been going on for the last 7-8 decades.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much. We now have the opportunity for questions, and I want to just ask is to really let your questions come from a place of real, true curiosity. Try to really separate the difference between kind of remarks and to being able to have the opportunity to really learn from Abdullah and from Meital here tonight.
Another Jewish-Muslim similarity
Yeah.
is how not to ask questions but deliver sermons.
Right, exactly.
Like it's an incredibly similar pathology. Again, I would love to listen to your sermons, but in the interest of time, if you have real good questions, we would love to entertain.
Exactly. So, and we want to give as many people a chance as possible. We'll probably just take maybe 10, 15 minutes max. So.
Are we going to be able to solicit questions from the online viewers?
No, we don't. We don't have a way to do that. So. I'm going to give this to you guys to
and you'll
use,
take that. That's
and
great.
I'm going to take this. So I'll be. There you go. And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Rebecca Gilad, actually from Mexico, married to an Israeli.
Oh.
And I've been questioning myself lately because I'm reading all the time about race and racism and biases, etc. Could you please help me define, is Jewishness a race? Is Jewishness a religion? What is it? Could you please give me a definition?
Sure.
Right, exactly. Yes, that's a good answer. The answer is yes.
Who is a Jew?
Who is it? That's really the question. I mean, I'd have to say that the notion of religion is a Western construct, and Judaism is a religion, but it's not just a religion. It's not just a religion. In our learning, in our those who have been through our classes will know that the Hartman Institute talks a lot about Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews. That there is a component of Jewish peoplehood. There is a story of family. The whole Genesis book is a story of a lineage and a family from Abraham to Yitzchak to Yaakov to Yosef, and then into Egypt, into Shemot, into Exodus. But the Torah doesn't stop there. The Torah doesn't say you're just a family, you're just a race, you're just an ethnicity. The Torah says specifically, then there's Har Sinai, there's a covenant. There is a relationship to God, and that is covenantal Judaism. So there is lineage Judaism, and there is covenantal Judaism. And neither of them can really exist. From our perspective, it can not really exist on their own, but you need both of them. Both of them are key parts of the Bible. They're key parts of the Jewish story. And they're complicated, as you're identifying, they're complicated to understand through Western lenses of religion and race because it just doesn't fit into those categories. But it truly is an inheritance of both traditions, that we are a people because of who our parents are, but we have a responsibility to live up to that covenant, which in Western terms is a religion.
It is so delightful that you sleep with a Jew and asking, who am I sleeping with? For the and still trying to make sense of this. I think in recent, what made this even more complicated, not only how Jews, they define themselves, but how mostly in the Western world, Christianity defined Judaism. If you look, Nazis killed if one of your grandparents are Jewish. Everybody. They killed every single Jew. If you are 1/16 of a Jew.
According to Jews, they're not even Jews.
They are not even Jewish. They are not even Jewish. Like some of the Russian Jews, for example, immigrated to Israel. Official rabbinate, they don't recognize them as Jews. So it is not even... Meital did a wonderful job in explaining self-definition, how complicated that is. But complication doesn't even end in the self-definition. There's a whole 2,000 years of externally imposed schizophrenic obsession with Jews and Judaism, thinking that these are genetically cancerous, evil, condemned communities or people.
Thank you so much. There is usually in the university there is a huge gap or tension between the Jewish student and the Muslim student. What are the activities, or what are you doing with your Muslim student to try to close as much as you can this tension or gap?
Your description of a very significant problem in college campuses, there is a major polarization and division over Israeli-Palestinian conflict is correct. And it's going in the wrong direction. I want to sound every alarm possible before it makes any difference in Israel and Palestine. It has reached to a level it could actually break academia. It has become a problem, more of a problem here, which has no relevance. But your underlying promise is, in my experience, not correct. This polarization is not Jews on one side and the Muslims on one side. It is a lot more, especially in the recent decade, it has become a lot more complicated than Jews are all pro-Israeli and the Muslims are all pro-Palestinian. It is only true for maybe Muslims. But if you look into pro-Israeli camp or the pro-Palestinian camp who are driving this polarization, it is a much more complicated demographics you could ever imagine. Much of the incredibly hyper-partisan, extremely divisive and polarizing pro-Palestinian organizations like BDS, SJP, Student for Justice in Palestine, are led by majority Jewish, at least on my campus, a lot of white, very ultra-liberal, progressive, and a lot of African Americans. We were talking about some of the activities in Minneapolis who are supporting certain political figures. It's the same thing. The faculty advisor until recently of the SJP on my campus was an Israeli citizen from Haifa. The faculty advisor was Israeli. So it is not black and white. It is not a Jewish-Muslim divide per se. That's one thing. That promises, it's a lot more complicated than that. If you look, increasingly more and more Black Lives Matter activists, increasingly far left progressive liberal activists are adopting the BDS platform and running the show on college campuses. And if you look at a lot of the ideological and institutional support to boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, is also led by Jewish Americans and Jewish organizations as well. So I'm not blaming Jews for one more thing in this year, but I'm trying to present an accurately complicated picture here. The second issue is it is really the tension and the polarization on college campuses is a prime example of how you can take your American lenses, American languages, American divides, and conflate it into an international conflict and do nothing positive and constructive to that conflict, but divide yourself. This is exactly what is happening. We took our racial divide in the United States, racial lenses between whites and blacks, white supremacy and the racism against African Americans, and we conflated entirely, copy-pasted almost on college campuses to Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where Israeli Jews are white supremacist white people and the Palestinians are African Americans, and imposing our own language, our own values. This is like international relations 101. This is one thing we are not supposed to do. You have to understand every region in its own historical, cultural lenses and conflict. You are not imposing these issues. So much so that I always tell to these Jewish Americans or African Americans who are not Muslim, Palestinians have enough of their own suffering. They have enough of their own problem. You are just imposing more by adding your own issues, your own conflict, with no concern whatsoever whether or not what you are trying to do, the kind of activism that you are trying to do by sipping Starbucks latte and cappuccino, whether it's making any difference in the life of Israelis or Palestinians there as well. It is really an American conversation, an American struggle. It's a manifestation of unhealed racial and socioeconomic divide in American communities. It is almost, it uses Israeli-Palestinian symbols, because I have been to many of these conversations, but in its substance almost has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It doesn't offer any inspiration, any solution whatsoever. Having said all of this, people are losing their sleep. Still, the number of people who are involved are so incredibly small, both on the pro-Israeli side as well as on the pro-Palestinian side. Go to any campus, Berkeley. My daughter goes to Berkeley. She's a junior there. Go to Columbia. How many students are here? 40,000. How many people are involved in this? All this noise coming out? 200, 300. Core involvement. So the job is not to be consumed by these loud minorities, marginal extremist groups, but to look at the majority of the rest of the community and engage and develop a space where legitimate dissent, legitimate criticism, legitimate condemnation of occupation, the policies of the state of Israel that is causing egregious, indefensible, morally corrupt human rights violations to Palestinians, where you can actually talk and discuss and debate without crossing the line into anti-Semitism, where you can talk about Palestinian leadership's corruption, terrorism, violence, and the Israel's legitimate security concern without declaring 1.8 billion people as just a terrorist. Islam is a violent religion. So this majority is silence, laziness, ineffectiveness is giving a lot of power into these very small activist, zero-sum, absolutist activist communities. That's exactly what we should do.
One last comment or question? Sorry.
Thank you, Mattel, for speaking to all of us and, coming out. And you too, Abdullah. Just didn't want to forget about you.
I was wondering.
I know. So I'm not going to, you and I and everyone, we talk ad nauseum about these issues because me and Abdullah don't see eye to eye on everything. So I will just take that out of the equation. The one thing I've struggled with in this space specifically, the interfaith space, is the age gap. And I'll give an example. In Chicago, I went to a lot of events like this where I'm the youngest person in the room by about 30 to 40 years. And it's not like, and I'm glad that the community comes out and want to engage with me, but these are people that I will not see day to day in my normal course of living just because where I'm at in my life. And so I'm wondering, what are you seeing and what's being done to address this age gap outside of the college campus where there is more meaningful dialogue between, Muslims and Jews at a more reasonable age base, where there can be some more productivity.
I am called Chaplin. I hang out with young people all the time. I know what you're talking about.
I think it's a really, really important question. And I think some of it has to do with where, I guess I'll say two pieces. I think one is you and I are both at a stage in life where we have full-time jobs and are raising young children, and adding additional pieces to our plate on top of that is quite significant. And so one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is figuring out, does interfaith work have to happen in interfaith settings, in settings that are particularly designated outside of our lives in many ways, instead of bringing them into the very spaces where we're working. We had a Jewish colleague join us 2 years ago at our retreat from Accenture. And he works at Accenture, which is a consulting firm. And within that consulting firm, there is a faith-based group for consultants who practice all different faiths, whose experience at work is very different than those who don't have faith, who don't have religious commitments, whether it means prayer on Fridays or observing the Sabbath. So where are the spaces where interactions are already happening? And I think one of the real significant, I would say two significant challenges is the general segregation that exists in our broader society, and that people aren't finding spaces either within their lives or outside of their lives for this type of engagement. And I think it goes back to the continuity question and some of the Pew reports around faith communities. And I think it's a really significant question for our faith leaders about how are younger people and people of my demographic affiliating or not affiliating. And I think it gets to the second question that you asked. You asked three questions. You asked about women, you asked about LGBTQ, and you asked about what's the answers in our traditions about how we interact with people of other faiths. And I think that we need to create space within our communities for people who care deeply about this work. And once that happens, our communities will come together more. And it's a significant task that you and I have to take on.
We have to expand the table. This can't be just 65 and plus and above generation work. I totally agree with you. And thank God I don't have that problem. I work with 18 to 22 years olds. It will keep me alive and young forever. But let's not also dismiss 65 and plus people. They vote twice higher than national average. They still hold the checkbooks. They make contributions. They have the accumulated wisdom. So they are not off the hook. They are part of the problem. They need to be educated. They need to be re-understood. Like just 2 weeks ago, I met one Jewish American fella who's giving close to $1 million to a lot of Islamophobic causes. He's 80 plus years old. We had a wonderful afternoon together. I flew out of my own pocket money to just make sense of why are you giving money to these haters, poisoning hearts and minds about Islam and Muslims. Anyways, I really hope he will not do that. But if you don't engage that age group, if you don't engage with that people who are at the age where they are thinking of their legacy, where they are giving their inheritances to certain causes, you are missing a